The Maya by Dr. Michael D. Coe. Chapter 3. The Rise of Maya Civilization. To archaeologists, it once seemed a very long step from the village cultures that we have thus far been considering to the awe-inspiring achievements of the classic Maya. But we now realize that the great leap forward was taken in what we know of as the late Preclassic. The more we know about that period, which lasted from about 400 or 300 BC to 80 to 50, the more complex and developed it seems. From the point of view of social and cultural evolution, the late Preclassic is really kind of a proto-classic, in which are present all of the traits usually ascribed to the classic Maya, with the exception of vaulted stone architecture and a high elaboration of calendar and script on stone monuments. Initially, the Maya highlands and lowlands, excluding the Pacific coast, were remarkably backward and provincial compared with the extraordinary and precocious civilization of Mexico's Olmec heartland. It will be remembered from the last chapter that at a time when the San Lorenzo Olmec were carving and moving multi-ton stone monuments, the Yucatan Peninsula was sparsely inhabited by pre-ceramic peoples following an essentially archaic way of life, centered on hunting and gathering, with some maize and manioc horticulture. Only after 1000 BC did they have villages and pottery, with small temples appearing after 800 BC. As the Olmec civilization went into a steep decline circa 400 BC, rapid changes took place in the Maya area. As populations rose, the southern lowlands of the peninsula became the new hotspot for complexity in Mesoamerica, resulting in the building of immense cities, particularly in the Peten's Mirador Basin, see below. Concurrently, we see in this epoch the beginnings of a Maya hieroglyphic writing and the calendar, perhaps to record the doings of kings and dynasties, a problematic topic since we still cannot read the very earliest Maya inscriptions beyond the dates. As for the origins of late Preclassic Maya civilization, all indications are that the Fonset Origo was Olmec. That ancient and now dead culture of the fertile Veracruz-Tabasco plain appears to have been as familiar to and respected by the early Maya as classical Greece and Rome are by ourselves. We shall see the direct evidence for this at San Bartolo. In art, in religion, in state complexity, and perhaps even in the calendar and astronomy, Olmec models were transferred to the Maya through an intermediate Izapan civilization, of which more subsequently. How are we to define the word civilization? How do the civilized differ from the barbaric? Archaeologists have usually dodged this question by offering lists of traits which they think to be important. Cities are one criterion. The late V.D. Child thought that writing should be another. But the obviously advanced Inca of Peru were completely non-literate. Civilization is, in fact, different in degree rather than in kind from what precedes it, but has certainly been achieved by the time that state institutions, large-scale public works, temple buildings, and widespread unified art styles have appeared. With few exceptions, the complex state apparatus demands some form of records, and writing has usually been the answer. So has the invention of a more or less accurate means of keeping time. Yet all civilizations are in themselves unique. The classic Maya of the lowlands had a very elaborate calendar, writing, temple pyramids, and palaces of limestone masonry with vaulted rooms, architectural layouts emphasizing buildings arranged around plazas with rows of stone stela lined up before some, and a very sophisticated art style expressed in bas-reliefs and in wall paintings. These traits are now known to have been developed in the late Preclassic period. The birth of the calendar. Some system of recording time is essential to all higher cultures, to fix critical events in the lives of the persons ruling the state, to guide the agricultural and ceremonial year, and to record celestial motions. The calendar round of 52 years was present among all Mesoamericans, including the Maya, and is presumably of very great age. It consists of two permutating cycles. One is of 260 days, representing the intermeshing of a sequence of the numbers 1 through 13 with 20 named days. Among the Maya, the 260-day count, sometimes called by the ersatz term tzolk'in, began with 1 imish, followed by 2 lk, 3 akbal, 4 kan, until 13 ben had been reached. The following day was aish, with the coefficient 1 again, leading to 2 men, and so on. The last day of the 260-day cycle would be 13 Aha, and it would repeat once again, commencing with 1 Imish. How such a period of time even came into being remains an enigma, but the use to which it was put is clear. Every single day had its omens and associations, and the inexorable march of the 20 days acted as a kind of perpetual fortune-telling machine, guiding the destinies of the Maya and of all the peoples of Mexico. It still survives in unchanged form among some indigenous peoples in southern Mexico and in the Maya highlands, under the care of calendar priests. Meshing with the 260-day count is a vegir, or ha'ab, of 365 days, so called because the actual length of the solar year is about a quarter day more. A circumference that leads us to intercalculate 1 day every 4 years to keep our calendar in march with the sun. Although the Maya were perfectly aware that the ha'ab was shorter than the tropical year, they did not change the calendar accordingly. Within the ha'ab, there were 18 named months of 20 days each, with a much dreaded interval of 5 unlucky days added at the end. The Maya New Year started with 1 pop, or pop, the next day being a 2 pop, etc. The final day of the month, however, carried not the coefficient 20, but a sign indicating the seeding of the month to follow, in line with the Maya philosophy that the influence of any particular span of time is felt before it actually begins and persists somewhat beyond its apparent termination. From this, it follows that a particular day in the 260-day count, such as 1 Kan, also had a position in the Ha'ab, for instance, 2 Pop. A day designated as 1 Kan 2 Pop could not return until 52 Ha'abs, 18,980 days, had passed. This is the calendar round, and it is the only annual time count possessed by the highland peoples of Mexico, one that obviously has its disadvantages where events taking place over a span of more than 52 years are concerned. Although it is usually assumed to be Maya, the long count was widely distributed in classic and earlier times in the lowland country of Mesoamerica, but it was carried to its highest degree of refinement by the Maya of the central area. This is really another kind of permutation count, except that the cycles used are so large that, unlike the calendar round, any event within the span of historical time can be fixed without fear of ambiguity. Instead of taking the vague year as the basis for the long count, the Maya and the other peoples employed a term, the tun, a period of 360 days. The long count cycles are 20 kins, 1 winal or 20 days, 18 winals, 1 tun or 360 days, 20 tuns, 1 katun or 7,200 days, 20 katuns, 1 baktun or 144,000 days. Long count dates inscribed by the Maya on their monuments consist of the above cycles listed from top to bottom in descending order of magnitude, each with its numerical coefficient, and all to be added up so as to express the number of days elapsed since the end of the last great cycle, a period of 13 baktuns, whose ending fell on the date 4 Aha 8 Kumku. The starting point of the present great cycle corresponds in the Thomson correlation to 13 August 3114 BC, Gregorian calendar. Thus, a long count date, conventionally written as 9-10-19-5-11-10 Chuan for Kumku, would be 9 Baktuns, 1,296,000 days, 10 Katuns, 72,000 days, 19 Tuns, 6,840 days, 5 Wanals, 100 days, 11 Kins, 11 days, or 1,374,951 days since the close of the last grade cycle, reaching the calendar round position 10 Chuan for Kumku. Something should also be said about the coefficients themselves. The Maya, along with a few other groups of the lowlands and the Zapotecs and the Mixtecs of Oaxaca, had a number system of great simplicity, employing only 2 symbols, a dot with the value of 1 and a horizontal bar for 5. Numerals up to 4 were expressed by dots only. 6 was a bar with a dot above, and 10 2 bars. 19, the highest coefficient in calendrical use, took the form of 4 dots above 3 bars. The treatment of higher numbers, for which the naught symbol, a stylized shell, was essential, will be discussed in Chapter 9. It is generally agreed that the long count must have been set in motion long after the inception of the calendar round, but by just how many centuries or millennia is uncertain. Be that as it may, the oldest recorded long count dates fall within Baktun 7, and appear on monuments which lie outside the Maya area. At present, the most ancient seems to be a stela II or Chapa de Corso, a major ceremonial center which had been in existence since early Preclassic times in the dry Grijalva Valley of central Chiapas. In a vertical column are carved the numerical coefficients 7, 16, 3213, followed by the day 6 Ben, the month of the vague year being suppressed, as in all these early inscriptions. This would correspond to 7 December 36 BC. 5 years later, the famous Stela C at the Olmec site of Tres Zapotes in Veracruz was inscribed with the date 7 16 6 16 18 6 Etznab. On the Chapa de Corzo monument, the initial coefficients are missing but reconstructible. Now the 16th Katun of Baktun 7 would fall within the late Preclassic, and we can be sure that unless these dates are to be counted forward from some base other than 130004 Aha 8 Kunku, as the end of the last great cycle is recorded, which seems improbable, then the Maya calendar had reached what was pretty much its final form by the 1st century BC, among peoples who were under powerful Olmec influence and who may not even have been Maya. Who might they have been? It will be remembered from Chapter 1 that one likely candidate for the language of the Olmecs was an early form of Mixtezoquian. Languages belonging to this group are still spoken on the Isthmus of Tehuantepec and in western Chiapas. Some scholars are now willing to ascribe the earliest long count monuments outside the Maya area proper to Mixtezoquian as well. In 1986, a magnificent stela was found at a place called La Mojarra in southeastern Veracruz. 2 Baktun 8 dates corresponding respectively to AD 143 and 156 are inscribed on it. These are accompanied by a text of about 400 signs in a script which most epigraphers call Ithsmian, but others term Epi-Olmec. The famous Tuxtla statuette, also found in southern Veracruz, is in the same system and dates to AD 162. In 1993, Terence Kaufman and John Justison announced their decipherment of the Ithsmian script, which they assert is in Mixtezoquian, but this decipherment has not been accepted by the majority of glyph specialists. Thus, we still are in the dark about what language group was responsible for either the Ithsmian script or for the early development of the long count. Be that as it may, it appears that writing in the calendar spread from this area of Veracruz and Chiapas along the Pacific coast of Guatemala and into the Maya highlands, eventually reaching the nascent states of the Peten forests and Yucatan. The hero twins in the creation of the world. We now know that much of the iconography of the ancient Maya, from the late Preclassic until the Spanish conquest, explicitly illustrates a creation story that is fundamentally agricultural, relating to the annual planting and harvest cycle of maize, the Maya staff of life, although there are many other themes adhering to it. Much of the most important part of the story, that which pertains to a marvelous pair of monster-slaying twins and their maize godfather, is preserved for us in the Popol Vuh, the Book of Council of the Quiche Maya. Other parts of what must have been an all-encompassing theogony can be fleshed out with ethno-historic sources, by analysis of the Maya epigraphic and archaeological record, and by comparison with well-known Mesoamerican cultures such as the Aztec. Originally produced from a watery void by a pair of grandmother gods named Shpiakok and Shmukain in the Popol Vuh, the universe had passed through various cycles of creation and destruction. Each successive world was peopled by imperfect beings, the last of whom were wooden idols whose doom was brought about because they wouldn't or could not give the gods proper praise. At the close of this penultimate creation, a great flood covered the world. The sky fell upon the earth, and the sun, moon, and stars were extinguished. In the midst of this darkness, a monstrous, arrogant bird monster, the Popol Vuh's Wukub Kakish, or Seven Macaw, proclaimed himself the new sun as well as the moon. More of him later. To the old creator couple was born a pair of twins. One of these was the maize god, Hunapu, or One Aha. His brother Seven Unapu was a mere double or companion. This handsome young god married and fathered two sons, Unbats and Unchuin. Later in the story, the maize god and his twin were playing ball in a ball court, but the noise angered the lords of the underworld, Xibalba, place of fright. They were summoned to the underworld, where they suffered a series of tests and rituals in several dread chambers, one of which was inhabited by the death bats. Eventually, they were sacrificed, and the maize god's head was hung into a tree, either a calabash or cacao tree. One day, a daughter of one of the underworld lords was passing under that tree. The suspended head spoke to her. When she raised her hand, she became magically impregnated. After 6 months had passed, she was expelled in disgrace from the nether regions to the earth's surface and took refuge in the house of the ancient creator divinities, the grandparents of her soon-to-be-born offspring. These children were the hero twins, Unapu and Xbalanque, hunters, blowgunners, ball players par excellence, and tricksters. By means of trickery, the hero twins turned their jealous half-brothers Unbats and Unchuin into monkeys or monkey men. These latter were also considered gods or demigods by the Maya, for whom they were considered the patrons of all the arts, including music, dancing, writing, and carving. As in many other Native American cultures, the main task of the hero twins was to rid the world of anomalies and monsters. Unapu and Xbalanque began with the formidable Wukub-Kakish, 7 macaw. As this gigantic bejeweled bird descended to a Nancy tree to gorge on its favorite fruit, Unapu shot it with a blowgun pellet that demolished its jade teeth. In the ensuing struggle, the bird monster ripped off the arm of Unapu, which was later recovered, but it was doomed. The grandmother replaced its teeth with nothing but soft maize kernels, and it died ignominiously. The twins went on to destroy 2 further monsters, one a volcano and the other the producer of earthquakes. At last, the twins achieved their final triumph, the defeat of the lords of Xibalba. Summoned by their slain father and uncle into the underworld, they were placed in the usual torture chambers. However, by means of tricks and legerdemain, they turned the tables on the gods of death, even defeating them in a ball game. But they eventually were killed themselves. The upperworld gods did not wish them to die, however, so they were revived and came into the court of Xibalba, disguised as dancers and mountebanks. Through a clever stratagem, the wily youths slew their enemies in a true harrowing of hell. Following their ultimate victory, they resurrected their father Unapu, the maize god. As he journeyed back to life, the maize god passed through the Xibalban waters in a canoe, paddled by 2 aged deities, and attended by naked young women who restored him the jewels and headgear from which he had been previously despoiled. This journey may have been fraught with danger, for 2 incised late classic bones from Tikal show the canoe sinking and its occupants in despair. However, with the assistance of his twin sons, the maize god emerged through a crack in the earth's surface, pictured as the carapace of a turtle. It seems clear that this whole mythic cycle was closely related to maize fertility. Towards the end of the dry season, by planting the seed in the hole made with his digging stick, the Maya farmer symbolically sent it to Xibalba, to its temporary death. Thanks to the intervention of the maize god's twin sons, the maize was reborn and rose again to the surface as a young sprout, to be nourished by the coming of the rains. Small wonder that many colonial period Maya identified the risen Christ with the maize god. The visible expression of this mythic cycle, as well as many others not surviving in the Popol Vuh, can be seen in the language of Maya religious iconography during almost every period. The bird monster 7 macaw appears on the late Preclassic in buildings and monuments as the ubiquitous principal bird deity, PBD, sometimes even perched on his tree. The maize god is recognizable from his maize silk-like tonsure and youthful appearance. Of his hero twin sons, Unapu has distinctive black spots as his god markings, while Xbalanque, called Ek Balam or Young Jaguar in glyphic texts, is marked with patches of jaguar skin. Izapan and the Pacific coast. Crucial to the problem of how higher culture came about among the Maya is the Izapan civilization, for it occupies a middle ground in time and in space between the middle Preclassic Olmecs in the early classic Maya. Its hallmark is an elaborate art style found on monuments scattered over a wide zone from Tres Zapotes on the Veracruz coast to the Pacific plain of Chiapas and Guatemala, and up into the Guatemala City area. Izapa itself is a very large site made up of over 80 temple mounds of earthen construction faced with river cobbles, just east of Tapachula, Chiapas, in the moist, slightly hilly country about 20 miles inland from the Pacific shore. Whether it belongs with Mexico culturally speaking, or with the Maya area is debatable. But the tongue actually spoken here was not Maya, but Tapacholteco, a vestigial member of the once more widespread Mixozoquian group. While Izapa was founded as a ceremonial center as far back as early Preclassic times, and continued in use until the early Classic, the bulk of the constructions and probably all of the many carved monuments belonged to the late Preclassic era. The Izapan art style consists in the main of large, ambitiously conceived but somewhat cluttered scenes carried out in bas relief. Some of the activities shown are profane, such as a richly attired person decapitating a vanquished foe, but there are deities as well. One of these is a long-lipped god, part human and part fish, most likely shark, who apparently is an ancestral form of Cha'ak, the ubiquitous Maya patron of lightning and rain. Another supernatural being present at Izapa has one leg ending in a serpent's body and head, and is thus the earliest known representation of the god Kawil, in classic times the presiding deity of the Maya ruling houses, but by far the leading figure in crystallizing Maya pantheon as seen in Izapan monumental art, extending to the giant stucco masks of the late Preclassic temples in the Peten and Belize, is the principal bird deity, or PBD. The monstrous form of Wukub-Kakish, or Seven Maka, the anthropomorphic bird prominent in the Popavu as the arrogant son of the creation preceding this one, see sidebar. On one monument he is seen descending to eat nanse fruit while the hero twins stand on either side of the tree. On another he perches on his tree while Unapu, blood coursing from the stump of his severed arm, gazes at him from below. Certain recurrent elements must represent well understood iconographic motifs, such as a U-shaped form between diagonal bars above the principal scene, perhaps an early occurrence of the sky band so ubiquitous in classic Maya art. The U itself is most likely the prototype of the Maya glyph for the moon, and is found repeated many times on the same relief. Izapa, then, is a major center with some of the features which we consider more typical of the Lowland Maya already in full flower. The Stela altar complex, the Maya Renga Cha'ak, and a highly painterly, two-dimensional art style which emphasizes historical and mythic scenography with great attention to plumage and other costume details. Writing and the calendar are absent, but as one moves along the Pacific slopes into east into Guatemala, one finds sites with inscriptions and Baktun 7 dates. One of these Guatemalan stations is Abaj Takalik, situated in a lush, well-watered Piedmont zone that in the days of the conquest was a great producer of chocolate, and is now devoted to coffee. Like Izapa, it is made up of earthen mounds scattered about the site with little attention to formal arrangement. That the Olmecs had once intruded here is apparent from a large boulder located less than 1 mile from the main group of the mounds, carved in relief with a bearded were-jaguar in the purest Olmec style. Stela 1 from the site is purely Izapan but dateless. On the other hand, Stela 2, now somewhat damaged, bore on its carved face two richly attired Izapan figures with tall, plumed headdresses facing each other across a vertical row of glyphs below a cloud-like mask of volutes from which peers the face of a sky god. The topmost sign in the column is beyond doubt a very early form of the introductory glyph in which the later classic inscriptions stands at the head of a long count date. Just beneath is the Baktun coefficient, which is pretty clearly the number 7. In recent decades, a University of California expedition has found a number of significant new monuments at Abaj Takalik, including a stela with 2 Baktun 8 dates, so that the site may have equaled Izapa in importance. A more complete Baktun 7 inscription appears on Stela 1, The Herrera Stella from El Baú, a coffee plantation considerably to the southeast of Abachtacalic, in a region studded with early classic centers of the Causeways culture. This object has attracted fairly hot debate ever since it was found in 1923, some refusing to believe that it's even as old as the Classic period, and its very discoverer claiming it as Aztec. On the right, a profile figure is stiffly posed with a spear in hand below a cloud scroll. Over the lower part of his face is some sort of covering, while to his headdress is attached a chin strap, a feature known to be extremely early in the Maya lowlands. In front of him are two vertical columns of glyphs, the right hand of which consists of little more than empty cartouches, which were probably meant to be painted. Let us, however, consider the row on the extreme left, for this is almost surely the earliest dated monument in the Maya area proper. At the top is the coefficient 12 above a fleshless jaw, a Mexican form of the day sign ebb. Then there are four indecipherable signs, followed by a series of long count numbers which can be reconstructed as 7, 19, 15, 7, 12, reaching the calendar round position 12 ebb. In terms of our own calendar, this would be in the year AD 36, some 256 years prior to the first such date in the Maya lowlands, but significantly later than the precocious inscriptions of Chiapas and the Veracruz coast. We cannot leave the Pacific coastal zone without mentioning a second sculptural tradition which reaches some degree of popularity both there and at Kaminaljuyu. This is expressed in large, crude, pot-bellied statues with puffy faces and lower jaws so inflated that they have been compared with Italy's one-time fascist leader, Mussolini. At Monte Alto, not far from El Baú, a group of these monstrous forms is placed in a row along with a colossal head carried out in the same style, and some believe that the entire potbelly complex is connected with the Olmec culture and precedes the Izapan. However, since Monte Alto is strewn with late Preclassic pottery shards, it is most likely that this was a subsidiary cult that coexisted with the Izapan rain god, just as Egyptian and Greco-Roman religious art flourished side by side in ancient Alexandria. But a cult to what deity? A fairly good case can be made out for this being none other than the fat god, without known functions but ubiquitous among the peoples of Mexico and the northern Maya area in classic times. Kaminaljuyu and the Maya highlands. A late pre-classic rival to Izapa in size and number of temple mounds, and in the splendor of its carved monuments was Kaminaljuyu during the Miraflores phase. This, it will be recalled, was once a major ceremonial site on the western outskirts of Guatemala City. The majority of the approximately 200 mounds once to be found there were probably constructed by the Miraflores people, whose rulers must have possessed a formidable economic and political power over much of the Maya highlands at this time. Archaeologist Marian Hatch and her Guatemalan colleagues have encountered evidence for the existence of a now extinct lake around which the earthen platforms of Kaminaljuyu were arranged, as well as a sophisticated system of intensive agriculture. Connected with the lake were various irrigation canals, one of which carried water to an artificial storage basin 52.5 feet wide and 36 feet deep. Leading from the latter were small tributary channels which brought water to the fields, some of which were agricultural terraces on the sides of the ravines. As the lake dried up about 200 BC, perhaps due to over-exploitation of the land, or even to tectonic movements, the region is highly earthquake-prone, the city dwindled until its revival during the early Classic period. The excavation of two Miraflores tombs has thrown much light on the luxury to which these rulers were accustomed. Mound EIII-3 at Kaminaljuyu consists of several superimposed temple platforms, each a flat-topped stepped pyramid fronted by a broad stairway. In its final form, it reaches a height of more than 60 feet. In lieu of easily worked building stone, which was unavailable in the vicinity, these platforms were built from ordinary clay and basket loads of earth and household rubbish. Almost certainly, the temples themselves were thatched roof affairs supported by upright timbers. Apparently, each successive building operation took place to house the remains of an exalted person, whose tomb was cut down from the top in a series of stepped rectangles of decreasing size in the earlier temple platform, and then covered over with a new floor of clay. The function of Maya pyramids as funerary monuments thus harks back to Preclassic times. The corpse was wrapped in finery and covered from head to toe with cinnabar pigment, then laid on a wooden litter and lowered into the tomb. Both sacrificed adults and children accompanied the illustrious dead, together with offerings of an astonishing richness and profusion. In one tomb, over 300 objects of the most beautiful workmanship were placed with the body or above the timber roof, but ancient grave robbers, probably acting after noticing the slump in the temple floor caused by the collapse of the underlying tomb, had filched from the corpse the jades which once covered the chest and head. Among the finery recovered were the remains of a mask or headdress of jade, plaques perhaps once fixed to a background of wood, jade flares which once adorned the earlobes of the honored dead, bowls carved from chlorite schist engraved with Miraflores scroll designs, and little carved bottles of soapstone and fuchsite. Miraflores pottery vessels from E33 and elsewhere belong to a ceramic tradition prevalent throughout southeastern Mesoamerica during the late Preclassic horizon from Izapan to El Salvador, and up into the central and northern Maya areas, but are set off from this tradition in their refinement and sophistication. Shapes have now become exuberant, with recurved outlines, elaborate flanges on rims and bodies, and the appearance of vessel feet. Some of the most amusing examples of the potter's art are effigy vessels, a few which show smiling old men. Painted stucco is often used to achieve effects in colors such as pink and green, unobtainable in fired slips. Most bowls and jars are embellished with engraved and carved scroll designs. A more peculiar kind of decoration, which is virtually a marker for the late Preclassic period in the Maya area, is found on Usulutan ware, believed to originate in El Salvador, where it attained great popularity. On this widely traded ware, a resistant substance such as wax or thin clay was applied to bowls with a multiple brush applicator. After smudging or darkening in a reducing fire, the material was removed to leave a design of yellowish wavy parallel lines on a darker orange or brown background. As for stone carving on a large scale, it was once believed that the Miraflores people made only mushroom stones. These peculiar objects, one of which was found in an E33 tomb, are of unknown use. Some scholars see vaguely phallic associations. Others, such as the late Stephen de Borhegi, connect them with the cult of the hallucinogenic mushrooms still to this day prevalent in the Mexican highlands, and it is claimed that the mortars and pestles with which these stones are so often associated were used in the preparatory rites. But we have much more to go by than that. Thanks to the devastation of Kaminaljuyu by the rapid urbanization of Guatemala City, it now appears that there were Miraflores artists capable of creating sculpture on a large scale in an Izapan style that can only be called the forerunner of the classic Maya. Moreover, the elite of this valley were fully literate at a time when other Maya were perhaps just learning that writing existed. Two of these monuments were encountered by accident in a drainage ditch. One is a tall granite stela embellished with a striding figure wearing a series of grotesque masks of Izapan gods. The one over his face is the head of the bird monster Wukub Kakish, and carrying a chipped flint of eccentric form in one hand. On either side of him are spiked clay incense burners exactly like those found in Miraflores excavations. The other is even more extraordinary. It must have been of gigantic proportions before its deliberate breakage. The surviving fragments show that there were several Izapan gods, one bearded, surrounding a human figure with downpouring tridents in place of eyes, probably a precursor of a god who later appears at Tikal. He too wields an eccentric flint. The glyphs associated with these figures may be their calendric names, for in ancient Mesoamerica, both gods and men were identified by the days on which they were born. A much longer text in several columns is incised below in a script which is otherwise unknown, but which, in the opinion of the late Tatiana Proskuriakov and others, may foreshadow classic Maya writing, since there are strong similarities in form, if not in specific characters. It cannot, however, yet be read. Not only were stelae of major size carved by the Miraflores artisans, but also four-legged thrones, Tenone figures called silhouette sculptures, which were perhaps originally meant to be stuck upright into temple and plaza floors, frog or toad effigy figures of all sizes, and many other forms. On Monument 65, the largest yet found in Kaminaljuyu, appeared three successive rulers seated on thrones, each flanked kneeling captives. All have different headdresses, apparently emblems of their names, as archaeologist Jonathan Kaplan notes. Once more, the pot-bellied figures are ubiquitous. Did they represent a cult of the people, separate from the more aristocratic religion of the rulers? Or do they, as some believe, belong to an earlier horizon? Archaeology has unfortunately arrived on the scene too late to answer this. The astonishing wealth of the Miraflores people, their artistic and architectural capabilities, their obvious relation to the classic Maya in matters of style, iconography, and script, all these things led one to believe that the Izapan culture of the highlands must have had a good deal to do with the adoption of civilized life in the central and northern areas. While the preeminence of Kaminaljuyu during the late Preclassic period is plain to see, its star began to sink by the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, and most of it was left in ruin at the close of the late Preclassic. It was not until the Mexican invasions of the early Classic that this great center regained its former splendor. Elsewhere in the Guatemalan highlands, the French archaeologist Alain Ichon has excavated the mountainside of La Lagunita, located in the Chishoy drainage some 25 miles northeast of the Quiche center of Chichicastenango. There he encountered a number of relief sculptures in a terminal late Preclassic style related to the Izapan culture, but somewhat aberrant, including one representation of the principal bird deity. There were 4 stone sarcophagi, one containing 2 superimposed human skeletons with a wealth of offerings, including jade, variously colored obsidian, and white flint, along with a pottery effigy of a terrifying deity with long nose and gaping mouth, revealing a lolling tongue and huge fangs. The Peten and the Maya lowlands. While the Maya highlands and Pacific coast were experiencing an extraordinary cultural efflorescence in the late Preclassic, the central and northern areas were hardly slumbering. Within the boundless forests, the agricultural economy and society had advanced to such a degree that massive temple centers were already rising in jungle clearings. But it is clear that from the very beginning of the people of the lowlands were taking a somewhat different course from that of their kinsmen to the south, and it is their unique qualities which so distinguished them in the Classic period, which was soon to be inaugurated. Although there are minor differences from region to region, a single widespread culture, Chicano, dominated the central and northern areas at the time. Usulutan were vessels with wide, everted lips, elaborate rim flanges, or complex outline are, as in the southern area, hallmarks for the period. Most pottery is legless, and confined to a simple black or red monochrome, with thick glossy slips that feel waxy to the touch. It is strange that in most known Chicano sites, figurines are not found, from which it may be supposed that there was a change in popular cults. The most unusual feature of Chicano culture, however, is the high elaboration of architecture. It must be remembered that the Peten Yucatan shelf is blessed with an inexhaustible supply of easily cut limestone, and with an abundant flint for tools with which to work it. Moreover, the Maya of the lowlands had discovered as far back as Mamon times that if limestone fragments were burnt and the resulting powder mixed with water, a white plaster of great durability was obtained. And finally, they quickly realized that the structural value of a concrete-like fill made from limestone, rubble, and marl. With these resources at hand, the Maya temple architect was able to create some massive constructions at a very early date. At the great Peten sites of Uaxactun, Tikal, El Mirador, Nakbe, and Calakmul, the latter just over the border in southern Campeche, deep excavations have shown that major pyramids, platforms, and courts were already taking shape by Chicano times. Many of these were faced with elaborate stucco friezes and the stairways flanked by massive stucco masks, all reflecting the dominant religious iconography of the times. Above all, the monstrous principal bird deity of the Popol There is general agreement, for instance, that the E7 sub-pyramid at Uashaktun, excavated by the Carnegie Institution of Washington in the 1930s, was built in the Chicanel phase, beautifully preserved by the overlay of later structures. This truncated temple platform is faced by brilliantly white plaster and rises in several tiers, each having the apron moldings which are so distinctive a feature of Maya architecture in the lowlands. On all four sides are centrally placed inset stairways flanked by the great monster masks which apparently represent the jaguar god of the underworld, the night sun, as well as sky serpents. Post holes sunk into the floor show that the superstructure was a building of pole and thatch. Although Group H at Uashaktun was discovered by Carnegie as long ago as 1935, it was only in 1985 that excavations under Juan Antonio Valdez of Guatemala's Institute of Anthropology and History revealed that its major constructions were almost entirely late Preclassic, with hardly any classic period overburden. The South Plaza, the focus of Valdez's research, is essentially a great platform supporting on the east a high truncated pyramid, H sub 3, with a central stairway. Flanking it are two buildings, with rooms which were once spanned by the Corbel Vault, or the so-called False Arch, while three other buildings faced it on the west, all of them enclosing a small plaza. Most of the South Plaza structures have huge, perfectly preserved masks and friezes formed of stucco over a stone core, and these were polychromed. On each side of the central stairway of H sub 3 are two superimposed masks, each 8.7 feet high. The iconography of the South Plaza is complex, with several deities represented, some of them with quite Olmecoid characteristics. Even more advanced temples have been uncovered at Tikal, which lies only a half-day's walk south of Uashaktun. Two late Chicanel structures, for instance, had superstructures with masonry walls, and it is possible, though certainly not proved, that the rooms were Corbel vaulted. Some quite extraordinary paintings embellish the outer walls of one of these temples, showing human figures standing in the back of cloud-like scrolls, carried out by a sure hand in black, yellow, red, and pink. Another set of murals, this time black on a red background, was found inside a late Chicanel burial chamber at Tikal. The subject matter comprises 6 richly attired figures, probably both human and divine. The two sets, which are thought to date from the last half-century of the 1st century BC, are pretty clearly in the Izapan style characteristic of Kaminaljuyu. Some of the late Preclassic tombs at Tikal prove that the Chicanel elite did not lag behind the nobles of Miraflores in wealth and honor. Burial 85, for instance, like all the others enclosed by platform substructures and covered by a primitive Corbel vault, contain a single skeleton. Surprisingly, this individual lacked head and thigh bones, but from the richness of the goods placed with him, it may be guessed that he must have perished in battle and been despoiled by his enemies, his mutilated body being later recovered by his subjects. The remains were carefully wrapped up in textiles, and the bundle placed in an upright position. A small greenstone mask with shell-inlaid eyes and teeth seems to have been sewn on to the bundle to represent the head. A stingray spine, the symbol of self-sacrifice among the Maya, and a spondylus shell were added to the gruesome contents. Packed around the burial chamber were no fewer than 26 vessels of the late Chicanel period, one of which contained pine wood charcoal dated by the radiocarbon process to AD 16-131. Later inscriptions trace the origin of the Tikal dynasty to one Yash-eb-Shuk, first step shark, who lived in the 1st century AD. According to epigraphers Simon Martin and Nikolai Grube, it could well be that this is his tomb. The towering achievements of the classic Maya in building and maintaining their enormous centers have blinded us to the equally remarkable fluorescence of the late Preclassic Maya culture. Two science and beliefs have provided exciting new data shedding light on this phenomenon. The first is Cerros, a relatively compact site located on a small, narrow peninsula near the mouth of the New River, on the southern edge of Chetumal Bay. Excavations and mapping carried out by David A. Friedel of Southern Methodist University have shown that this late Preclassic center, with four primary pyramidal structures along with a host of other buildings, was surrounded by a moat-like canal which may have been connected with raised agricultural fields. One such pyramid was a two-tier temple platform. Its central stairway was flanked by four elaborate plaster sculpture masks. Friedel interprets this as an elaborate cosmological diagram involving four important gods, and its relationship to the huge platform masks found at Huaxtacun and on early buildings at Tikal is obvious. Far up the New River, a considerable distance to the southwest of Cerros, is the important site of Lamanai, known as the Indian Church on older maps of Belize, which was excavated by David M. Pendergast of the Royal Ontario Museum during a series of field seasons beginning in 1974. Lamanai lies on a lake formed by the river, and its 718 mapped structures are stretched out in strip along from its shore. There is even an ancient harbor in the northern part of the site, testifying to its entrepreneurial importance in the regulation of ancient Maya trade. While it was occupied from earliest times right into the post-conquest period, much of its importance lies in the large, imposing late Preclassic temple pyramids, which usually underlie early classic constructions, including one with a plasterwork mask closely resembling those from Cerros. The Mirador Basin. But the full scope of this late Preclassic achievement in the southern Maya lowlands has only come to light at the sites of Nakbe and El Mirador, located in the northernmost Peten in the Mirador Basin, a region with extensive swamps or bajos that were probably shallow lakes in that era. We have already seen that Nakbe had a precocious development of monumental architecture during the Mamon phase of the Middle Preclassic. El Mirador, some 8 miles northwest of Nakbe and connected to it by a causeway which crosses the intervening bajos, has turned out to be the oldest Maya capital city, far in advance of Tikal, which it dwarfs by its size and lessens by its antiquity. The investigations and mapping carried out initially by Bruce Dallin and Ray Matheny, and later by Richard Hansen, have shown that El Mirador is almost entirely of late Preclassic Chicano date. It was abandoned throughout the early Classic, but there is a shoddy late Classic reoccupation which had little importance. There are two groups of monumental construction connected by a causeway, and in fact a whole network of causeways radiates out from El Mirador across the surrounding swampy landscape. The east group is dominated by the Danta Pyramid and its associated platforms, which cover an area of 18 hectares. The pyramid and the structure upon which it sits reach a height of 230 feet, as archaeologist David Webster reminds us, the height of an 18-story building, and thus with its smaller superstructures must comprise an overall bulk which places it as the largest in Mesoamerica, if not the entire world. The Tiger Pyramid on the west group is no less than 180 feet high, with an estimated volume of 380,000 cubic meters. As at Cerros, Lamanai, Huaxtacun, and Tikal, gigantic stucco masks of deities flank stairways at El Mirador. One excavated structure has huge mask of the principal bird deity, the great bird monster so typical of the late Preclassic. Typical also of this intriguing period in Maya culture history is the triadic pattern of architecture found here and at other similarly early lowland sites. This consists of a principal pyramid, plus two other ones which face each other, with all stairs leading from a central plaza. Richard Hansen suggests a mythological basis for the pattern, perhaps a triad of gods such as we find much later at the classic city of Palenque. The largest buildings at Nakbe were erected at the beginning of the late Preclassic circa 300 BC over Middle Preclassic platforms. Dr. Hansen has uncovered no fewer than 9 monumental architectural masks and panels, including the largest yet known for the Maya. Situated at the base of Structure 1, a vast relief of the PDB over 16 feet high and 36 feet wide, completely polychromed. Nakbe also has a stela, reconstructed by the archaeologists from many fragments, which shows two important personages facing each other. Details of the costume link this relief in time and style to the Miraflores granite stela from Kaminaljuyu, which must have been exerting a potent influence on the lowlands during this era of nascent Maya civilization. We now realize that by AD 250, The Mirador Basin cities had suffered a collapse as disastrous as the one that occurred through the southern lowlands at the end of the Classic. El Mirador, Nakbe, and the other centers were abandoned to the forest for reasons that are not entirely clear. But as in the later case, it seems to have been due to drastic overpopulation with all its consequences, compounded by a severe drought. Further research on this problem is sorely needed. San Bartolo. One of the great archaeological finds of all time took place in 2001 when Dr. William Santurner, now of the University of New Hampshire, stumbled across San Bartolo, a relatively small Peten site in dense forest some 25 miles northeast of Tikal. Taking refuge from the intense sun in the shade of a looter's tunnel that had penetrated a temple pyramid, Santurno's flashlight illuminated part of an extraordinarily well-preserved fresco that the perpetrators had overlooked in their search for saleable antiquities. This has proved to be the earliest Maya painting known, dating to the 1st century BC. In its beauty and sophistication, it is the equal of the famous late classic murals of Bonampak. By April 2004, only half of the mural's estimated 90 feet had been revealed, but it already casts new light on Maya religion and society during the late Preclassic. In a way, it is the painted polychrome version of some of the iconography that we see in Izapan sculpture, the creation of humankind and of maize. The mural is on the upper part of the 4 inner walls of a modestly sized, flat-roofed structure built onto the back of a pyramid. During a period of reconstructing of the pyramid, the room with the paintings was partly demolished and filled with rubble. It is this rubble that has to be cleared by Santurno's project to free the frescoes. On the exterior of the structure were further paintings and large stuccoed reliefs of the BPD. According to Heather Hurst, who has been copying the mural, at least 2 hands are detectable. The ancient artist painted directly on the wet plaster in brilliant pigments, red, black, yellow, white, gray, and blue. Along the north wall is shown the resurrection of the maize god, with 4 young women refreshing him with maize tamales in a gourd full of water, all standing on a feathered serpent that issues from the maw of a gigantic anthropomorphic mountain, in effect, a cave. The face of the protagonist, with its slanting eye and downturned mouth, is identical to life-size jade masks of the maize god that have survived from the Olmec civilization. On the west are no less than 4 unapus, each standing before a world direction tree, on top of which perches a PBD holding in its mouth a 2-headed serpent. One of these has descended to a Nancy tree to eat its fruit, as in the Popavu myth and at Isapa. In each case, the hero twin holds his own penis in his hand and perforates it with a long instrument, the blood graphically spurting forth. A royal rite that heretofore we have only known for the classic and post-classic Maya, although blood letters of jade or stingray spines are attested for the Olmec. Between some unapus and the tree are sacrificial offerings, including a deer and a fish. Then, to the right of these scenes, the maize god with his Olmec mask beats a turtle shell with a quatrefoil cave, itself placed within a gigantic turtle, possibly representing the earth. The maize god is shown descending from above. Could this be his descendant to Jibaba? And as one approaches the northwest corner of a room, a king sits on a scaffold during what must be his accession, as a lesser personage climbs a ladder to offer him the headdress of rulership. From Preclassic to Classic in the Maya lowlands, the splendor of late Preclassic civilization is found throughout the Peten Yucatan Peninsula, wherever the spade has gone deep enough. Even in the seemingly less favorable northern area, there are enormous constructions datable to this period, such as the Great High Mountain at Yashuna, a temple substructure having a ground plan of 197 by 427 feet. At the site of Etzna in north-central Campeche, research carried out by Ray Matheny has shown that the late Preclassic occupants had constructed a massive hydraulic system, consisting of 13.75 miles of canals radiating out in all directions from the city center, and even a moat surrounding a kind of fortress. The moat is obviously defensive, but Professor Matheny speculates that the canals could have been used to drain good agricultural land, to transport goods and people to the urban center, and to provide a habitat for game birds, fish, mollusks, and other animals. By the terminal late Preclassic of the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, we are on the threshold of classic Maya civilization. Temples are arranged around plazas, construction with limestone and plaster, apron moldings and frontal stairways on pyramids, tomb building, and frescoes with naturalistic subjects. All had already taken shape by the end of the late Preclassic. This brief epoch sees the intrusion of new ceramic traits which seem to have been first celebrated in El Salvador and later in Belize, the most important of these being the addition of hollow breast-shaped supports to bowls, hourglass-shaped pot stands, and polychrome. Maya polychrome is distinguished by a brilliant range of colors applied over a glossy, translucent orange underslip, but wherever it was first invented, it certainly was not native to the Peten region. Corbelling of rooms must have evolved from the methods employed in the construction of tombs, and by AD 250 began to be in universal use at Peten sites. The principle is simple. Above the spring line of the wall, successive courses of stones were set in overlapping rows up to the vault summit, which was capped by flat stones. However, there is an inherent structural weakness, and the great thrust from above is taken up in Maya buildings by massive walls and by the strength of the rubble cement fill. Nevertheless, once adopted, it became the badge of Maya architecture in the lowlands as opposed to the thatched or flat beam roofs of Mexico. The list is impressive, but two items are missing or exceedingly rare: monuments with long count dates and hieroglyphic writing. Towards the close of the late Preclassic, writing had begun to appear sporadically, and it definitely celebrated the doings of great personages. A human figure in relief on the walls of the Lowland cave in Yucatan associated with a Maya date, which may fall in the year AD 100, all testify to this. But literacy and a concern with recording important dates in the lives of rulers did not become really prevalent in the lowlands until the eve of the Classic period. A good example of this would be the greenstone pectoral at Dumbarton Oaks, said to be from Quintana Roo. A were-jaguar face on one side indicates that the object was originally Olmec. During the late Preclassic, the reverse was delicately incised with the seated figure of a richly garbed ruler, facing 4 vertical columns of hieroglyphs. Next to the personage's shoulder is inscribed his name, almost surely to be read Sky Owl. The same glyph combination appears twice in the text, once following a sign now known to be a very early form of the verb to be seated. Epigraphers conclude that the pectoral reverse records the seating, or accession to power, of the ruler in question. By the time the long count calendar made its debut in the lowlands, at the opening of the early Classic about AD 250, the life and times of the royal house had come to be the major preoccupation of the Maya state, and full Maya civilization had begun. This concludes Chapter 3.